4th annual Concord Reads. Over the last 43 years, the Foundation has worked to advance the mission of raising money and support for our library. For the past several years, the Foundation has partnered with other supporters of learning to fund all the library's programming. Concord Reads is a terrific example of a program designed to promote reading, conversation, and community. Your very presence here tonight suggests that we are successful on all fronts. And it should be noted that we're just a fraction of the readers who bought or borrowed the approximately 70 copies of this year's book in circulation at the library to be part of this community read. But tonight, this is the gala event, the last of our discussions on this year's book, led by none other than the author himself. A huge thank you to the New Hampshire Humanities Council, the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, Jefferson Pilot, the Concord Monitor, and all our other in-kind donors noted in our program for helping to make this program series possible. I will also mention in parting that the Foundation is in the midst of our annual appeal, and anyone interested in supporting our efforts can find envelopes on the refreshment tables after the program. Also in the refreshment area, there will be books by the author for sale. There will be an author signing, and the proceeds of the sale, 20%, will be donated for next year's Concord Reads program. I was specifically instructed to draw your attention to the little box in your program that invites you to participate in the questions from the audience. I am told that our author is particularly warm in receiving questions. So it's my pleasure at this time to introduce Michael Herman, a Foundation board member, the owner of Gibson's Bookstore, and co-chair of the Concord Reads Committee, to begin our program on Water Witches.
Thank you, Marcia, and hello, readers of Concord. It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce our guest of honor, and not only because I enjoy his writing, it's also because I enjoy his company. Chris Bohjalian is just a wonderful guy to have around. As Marcia mentioned, I'm Michael Herman from Gibson's Bookstore. I'm also on the board of the Concord Library Foundation and of Concord Reads, hence my getting drafted to introduce my friend Chris tonight. Anyway, I moved to Concord in 1995 to buy Gibson's, and immediately, being a bookish sort, I looked around for books that could help explain to me exactly where it was I moved to. People suggested some of the works of Donald Hall, String Too Short to Be Saved, Life Work, for instance, and they also mentioned novels like Dogs of March by Ernie Hebert and anything by Russell Banks. Well, I plowed through those, and they were great, but it was the dead of winter, and I was hoping for something perhaps a little more lighthearted than affliction. In February of that first year, a new novel came into the bookstore. It was from the University Press of New England, and it had one of those drab covers that university presses were famous for in those days. It was the color of burlap and had a picture of a stick on it. But the rep said it was great, so undeterred, I sat down one evening to start it. As you may have guessed, it was Water Witches by our guest of honor, Chris Bohjalian, and I was immediately captivated. Was this the literary key to my new home that I had been seeking? Vermont, I reasoned, is merely New Hampshire upside down. I didn't know much in those days. And possibly still don't. But here was a novel that had it all, it seemed to me. An urbane, flawed, ironically minded narrator, a lot of strong, intriguing women characters, politics, elements of fantasy, even baseball. And the author, like me, was a transplanted New Yorker. I finished it, I loved it, and I started putting it into the hands of everyone who came into the store. Did I learn about Concord by reading Water Witches? Or any other book? Not really. Searching diligently for mention of my new hometown in the Dogs of March, for instance, I found only one. Its former status as home to the state mental hospital. The same search in Water Witches yields only the fact that Concord is the closest place to have your car washed if Vermont is suffering a drought. But I did learn a lot about character. Scotty Winston, Patience Avery, Reedy McClure, Miranda, these were real people to me and have stayed with me over all these years in a way that characters from most novels have not. Now, you fast forward a couple of years, and Chris is starting to make the rounds of New England bookstores to promote his novel, Midwives. Oprah comes calling, and suddenly Chris is a best-selling author. But Chris still visits every independent store he can find on a map, and he continues to do so with each new book. He wants to meet the people who sell his books, and he especially wants to meet his readers. I think he finds strength in them. Sometimes I'm afraid he finds material. But even if he does, we forgive him. Chris Bohjalian, getting to the real introduction, is the author of 9 novels, including his most recent New York Times bestseller, Before You Know Kindness, and his collection of columns and essays, Idle Banter. He won the New England Book Award in 2002. His novel Midwives was the #1 New York Times bestseller, a selection, as I mentioned, of Oprah's Book Club, the Publisher's Weekly Best Book, and a New England Booksellers Association Discovery Pick. His work has been translated into 18 languages, been published in 21 countries, and twice become acclaimed movies. Midwives and Past the Bleachers, which we're hoping someday may return to print, even if Chris is not. The Law of Similars, Water Witches, and Buffalo Soldier are in development for movies as well. He's written for a wide variety of magazines, including Cosmopolitan, Reader's Digest, and the Boston Globe Sunday magazine, and has been a Sunday columnist for the Burlington Free Press since 1992. Chris graduated from Amherst College, and as you know, lives in Vermont with his wife and daughter. Speaking on behalf of the Board of Concord Reads, we're very happy to have chosen Chris's fine novel, Water Witches, for our community reading project this year. This novel is fertile ground for all kinds of discussion. We have the privilege tonight to have that discussion anchored by the author himself. So please sit back and enjoy yourselves as Chris talks about himself, his novel, and his writing. But don't get too comfortable, because before too long we'll be opening the event up for your questions and your comments. And now, please welcome Chris Bohjalian.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. Will you come with me whenever I'm touring? Thank you, Robin. I want all of you to know that despite the fact you've chosen a novel with the word water in the title, that you are not responsible for the inclement weather or the rain that northern New England is currently enduring. And this novel was first published in 1995. New Hampshire and Vermont were in the midst of a drought. So there is no cause and effect. If anyone's responsible, though, I do tell you that when I was in California, in Northern California, in early September, on behalf of my new book, and I'm not making this up, a building 2 doors down from where I was speaking burned down just before I appeared, and then I went to Southern California just before the firestorm. So wherever I go next, there will be locusts. It is a pleasure to be with you tonight. I'm so flattered that so many of you have come out despite the rain and the wind. You are indeed the medieval monks of the digital age because you still care about what words and reading and books can mean to the soul. Some of you might be familiar with a study the National Endowment for the Arts published last year called Reading in America. Essentially, it was a survey of reading trends and habits in the United States, and some of the statistics were absolutely chilling. I will share with you but one set. In 1982, roughly 60% of American adults reported having read at least one novel or collection of short stories in the preceding 12 months. In 1992, the number had fallen to roughly 54%, and in 2002, a mere 44% of American adults, roughly 2 out of 5, reported having read a novel in the last year. That is a net decline of roughly 20 million readers of fiction. Or, to put that in more prosaic terms, If you subtract out every single human being who last year read as his or her one novel, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, more people were curling up in bed at night and reading the instructions on the back of their bottles of shampoo. I actually made that observation in my newspaper column in the Burlington Free Press, and I received a letter from a no doubt really nice grandmother, but she was a really angry grandmother because her granddaughter works for L'Oreal. And she concluded her letter by saying, "And so, Mr. Bohjalian, if you live to be 92, I rather doubt you will write 3 words as memorable as lather, rinse, repeat." She's right. But your readers, and you are here, and I am so grateful. I am grateful to Concord. I am grateful to New Hampshire. I am grateful to the library. I'm grateful to the committee for choosing Water Witches. I thank all of you so very, very much. The reality is that it wasn't that long ago that my book sold briskly, but only among people with my last name. So the notion that there is an entire community in Concord, New Hampshire, reading one of my novels is one of the greatest gifts that any writer can have, and I wish every writer could have this sort of experience a couple of times in their life. It's just glorious. I have to tell you a story. Not too long ago, I was reading in a library to a group of preschoolers, which meant that I wasn't reading from Water Witches. I was reading from Horton Hears a Who. And I had chosen that particular book because it's got that wonderful line in it, a person, no matter how small, which is incredibly empowering. And so every time we got to that line in the book, a person, no matter how small, I had the little kids say it out loud with me. And the thing about Dr. Seuss is this. Whenever he had a line that he liked, he used it a lot. And so by the time we got to the end of Horton Hears a Who, I had those little kids in their teeny tiny beanbag chairs, little mattresses on their floor, and there were about 60 of them, really rocking and rolling, and we were raising the roof of that library, screaming, a person, no matter how small. And I did great. I was really proud of how great the kids were and how responsive they were. And we were done. Went to the back of the room, and I had one of those teeny tiny little Dixie cups full of fruit punch. And drinking my little teeny tiny Dixie cup full of fruit punch, and a gentleman comes up to me, and he said, "Do you really think you should have gotten those children so riled up about books? We are, after all, in a library." And before I could apologize, which I was going to do, since I presumed this was a library trustee, and I feared I had just done that drunken dinner guest with a lampshade on his head thing, the librarian herself came over to me, and she said, smiling, "That was so great of you. Thank you. Nothing we like to see more than the kids having fun during story hour and getting really juiced about books." I loved that. Juiced about books. I understand that you Concord readers are supposed to be bookish. If you're a woman, you're supposed to wear sensible shoes and have your hair back in a bun. And if you're a man who's part of a community reads program, you're supposed to have a pocket protector on your shirt and one single eyebrow running along your forehead like shrubs on a mountain ledge. But that moment, when that librarian said to me that she loved to see the kids juiced about books, well, that said it all. As folks who've been part of this Concord Reads program, you know something that we try to teach our preschool kids and elementary school age children all the time, but as grown-ups, we tend to forget, and that's this. Reading is meant to be fun. It is capable of evoking from us the same conversational enthusiasm as movies and music and stage plays and the Red Sox and the Patriots if we only give the notion a chance. I think this helps explain the renaissance in reading groups, whether they're in libraries or living rooms or Gibson's bookstore or the auditorium here in Concord. It's not just the desire for self-improvement that has us all spurting cards and spinning like mad women and men. It's the reality that books offer pleasures so wondrous that some people actually find them decadent, which is of course why we read books and why I write them. We love them. I wrote Water Witches over a decade ago, but I still remember vividly the pleasure I derived writing it and the enthusiasm I felt when I first realized here's a subject that I want to spend 2 years of my life with, and I remember the moment vividly. I was thumbing through the Burlington Free Press, and I saw this photograph of this beautiful, majestic, interesting, charismatic woman with this mane of silver hair, and she was holding in her hands a forked stick or a divining rod. And the photograph of her was in the paper because in a few weeks, the American Society of Dowsers was going to hold their annual convention in Vermont's Northeast Kingdom. I knew vaguely what a dowser was, but I didn't know the details. I was fascinated that supposedly 2,500 dowsers were going to descend upon Vermont from all over the country and something incredible like 23 countries to talk about water witching. And right beside this photograph was a somewhat less interesting article on the surface, but one that still struck me as having an odd connection, and that other article was this. It was an article about the Sugar Bush Ski Resort's upcoming water withdrawal permit hearing. And now they were going to have this hearing to tap a river to make snow. And I thought to myself, well, you know, you can't marry the right-hand side of the page with the left in reality. But I wonder if you can in fiction. What would happen if all those dowsers descended upon Sugar Bush? What kind of sparks might fly? And so I decided to venture to the Northeast Kingdom to visit the dowsing convention and meet some dowsers. And I went to a number of seminars, and I began to learn a lot about the culture. Now, I learned there are two kinds of dowsers. There are the tangible target dowsers, and then I discovered there are the dowsers who will douse for just about anything, including auras and parking spaces, and whether their grapes have been irradiated. There's an old episode of the TV sitcom Friends, but I always love it because there's a scene where Joey Tribbiani moves away from Lisa Kudrow, or Phoebe, because Phoebe is picking things out of his aura. Well, when I went to that convention, the very first thing somebody said to me is, "Are you comfortable here? Your aura looks a little dark, a little foggy." And I was, because one of the seminars I went to was called Dowsing Your Pet. And this was a whole new frontier for me. And it took me a minute to fall in love with it, but once I did fall in love with it, I was absolutely hooked. And this is what happened in the Dowsing Your Pet seminar. Somebody asked a question, is this about dowsing our pets to understand what kind of vitamins they need, or if they're happy or they're unhappy? And the pet dowser told this story to explain what she did for a living. A client had come to her with a German Shepherd. And the German Shepherd for 4 years had been immaculately behaved, one of those, charismatic, wonderful dogs. All of a sudden, however, the dog, for reasons that the owner didn't understand, had begun to defecate on the living room floor in front of the television set. So the owners brought the dog to the veterinarian. And the veterinarian could find nothing physiologically wrong with the dog, so they brought the dog to the trainer. And the trainer could find nothing wrong with the dog, so they brought the dog to a pet psychiatrist who said, "This dog is fine." Enter the pet dowser. She got out her crystal, and she proceeded to hypnotize the dog. And then when the dog was under hypnosis, She proceeded to ask it a series of yes and no questions. We'd understand it that if the pendulum was swinging clockwise, she was getting a yes answer, and if it was swinging counterclockwise, she was getting a no answer. And with the dog under hypnosis, she learned, and this is an exact quote, not novelist hyperbole, what the dog was enduring was a past life transgression on the present. Apparently, in a past life, probably in the 18th century, the dog had had an abusive Parisian owner and had then heard French spoken on the San Francisco television set in the present. Once the dowser explained this to the dog no longer defecated in front of the television set, which, of course, led somebody ask the question in all earnestness, well, when you were explaining this to the dog, were you speaking French or German? This was just material that was too good to pass up as a novel. On the second day I was at the convention, I went to the convention store. There really is a convention store. If you ever go to the American Dowsers Convention, you get the bumper stickers that say Dowsers do it anywhere, the T-shirts, the L rods, the divining rods, the Y rods, and of course, the crystals. And there are hundreds and hundreds of different crystals. And, well, I bought a little silver bullet pendulum on a string. And I was sitting in front of the general store in Danville, and I was looking at my pendulum. And a gentleman sat down next to me. His name, I would learn later, was Paul Seveny. Paul Seveny looked at the way I was looking at this pendulum. He said, son, that's a tool. That's not a good luck charm. It's no more useful than a hammer, but if you use it right, it's every bit as useful as a hammer. But don't use it as any sort of totemic charm that will only get you in trouble. Okay? And I looked at Paul and I said, okay. Then I put that in my pocket as the best good luck charm I was ever going to have. And I brought it back with me to Lincoln, Vermont, where I lived. And in the next week, stuff started to happen. First of all, a magazine ran an article I had written with a typo that was not merely egregious, it was obscene. The bookshelves that I had built for the living room, and I'm not a particularly handy guy, but I was really proud of these bookshelves, collapsed, and one of our cats disappeared. So I took this pendulum, and I put it at the very bottom of a bag of cat litter. Then I brought it to the dump in Lincoln, Vermont. This is before we had a transfer station, and we just built a recycling shed the week before. And I took this pendulum, the bottom of this bag of cat sand, and I heaved it as far into the mountain of garbage as I could, and the bag bounced and then rolled down the hill and came to a stop right by the side of the brand new recycling shed we had built. And I drove home. That night, the recycling shed burned down. But I had met Paul Seveny, and I would remain in touch with Paul Seveny because Paul Seveny would turn out to be the dowser's dowser. This is a man who dowsed with maps, who dowsed with Y rods, who dowsed with L rods, who dowsed with pendulums, who dowsed all of the drilled wells of the municipality of Waterbury, Vermont, who found lost children and made not a fortune, but a sizable amount of money and gave it all to the local first response squads, the volunteer fire departments, and the Northeast Kingdom. Because in his opinion, this wasn't his own ability working, and therefore he should be sharing it with the community. And of course, Paul Seveny would morph into the dowser Elias Gray in the novel Water Witches. And I will tell you that one of those that the pet dowser is in Patience and Reading's Bridal Party. Now, I also spent a lot of time researching the other side of the story, the running slime dog of capitalism side of the story, the ski resort side of the story, the lobbyist side of the story. I started to hang around with Vermont senators and representatives as soon as the legislature was in session and trailing the administrators who manage Vermont ski resorts. I wanted their take on the issue. I wanted their side. And of course, I trailed hydrogeologists, the scientists who, you naturally, scoffed at the dowsers, and I remember one afternoon vividly. I was at Stratton Mountain in southwestern Vermont, and I was walking around with a hydrogeologist who I'd actually quoted in a newspaper article I'd written about dowsing, to the point that dowsing is ridiculous. There is nothing to it. No self-respecting hydrogeologist would ever use a Y rod. Well, we walked all around Stratton Mountain. He was telling me about underground aquifers and, and how you tap rivers and what you're looking for. And at the end of the day, we had a great time together. He said, "Want to go for beer?" I said, "Sure." So we go to a bar in Manchester, and after we had a beer, I said, "I want to show you something." And we go out into the parking lot, and he's got one of those great hydrogeologist pickup trucks with a cab in the back that's huge and a big toolbox in the back. And he opens up the toolbox and he says, "You can never use my name if you ever tell anyone this story." I said, "Okay." And he pulls out of the back two L-rods that are at least 3.5 feet long. And he said, "When nothing else works, I use these babies because they always work." And I said, "But you told me you never use Y rods." He said, I don't use L rods." Now everyone supposedly can douse. I know that there are a number of you who might have been about 2 or 3 weeks ago with some dowsers on the green in Concord learning to douse, and so I will tell you that I think everyone probably can douse but me. Just like Scotty Winston, I can't douse my septic tank if I stand right on top of it. I couldn't douse the Pacific Ocean from the Malibu Pier. But it is not for want of dowsers trying to teach me. Dowsers in New Hampshire and Maine and Vermont have all patiently given me dowsing lessons. And the fact that they failed is a testimony to me, not to them. But dowsers are nothing if they are not patient, which I think is one of the reasons why one of the main characters in Water Witches is indeed named Patience. Certainly it is a glib homage to the fact that Patience Avery is anything but patience. But the reality is that the dowsers I met, whether they are the tangible target dowsers or the intangible dowsers who douse with auras, are wonderfully forthcoming and giving and patient. One of the great things about being a novelist is it gives you the opportunity to ask perfect strangers questions that are absolutely none of your business. And dowsers put up with my asking them lots and lots of questions over a 6-month period when I was researching Water Witches. And the reality is that I did spend some time researching Water Witches before writing a single word. I was a single word that remained. I experimented a lot with voice. And I experimented with third person and first person, but none of it was coming together to my satisfaction until one evening when I'd been exploring voices for a while. I was at my mother-in-law's in New York City. And I was at a dinner party. Now, I married into a family of women, not unlike Scotty Winston. I would never call my in-laws a coven. And it was February. And dinner had started, and my oldest sister-in-law had not yet arrived. Well, midway through the first course, and I have to tell you that my mother-in-law lived in one of those old New York City apartments that you see in Woody Allen movies that seem to stretch forever. And this particular dining room table was, I think, only a little bit shorter than the length of the stage. And finally, midway through the first course, with a big to-do, my sister-in-law comes into the dining room and takes off her scarf and her winter coat and her hat, because remember, it's early February, and she has in her arms my 3-month-old nephew, who is with her, whose nose is as red as a baby cherry, and they are late because she has been down at the Time Life building down in the 50s and Fifth Avenue protesting the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, which has just come out, and that's why her little boy is with her, because if she's going to protest the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue, she's going to bring her infant with her. And she at the time was the president of Women Against Pornography, which is a wonderful organization. But I turned to her and I looked at my nephew and his red nose and I said, I have to ask, with all of the really horrible child pornography and the horrible violence against women, why are you wasting your time protesting the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue? And she turned to me and she said with absolute daggers in her eyes, are you stupid or curious? Some of you will remember that line from the first chapter of Water Witches. That is precisely what Patience says to Scotty. And it was at that moment that Scotty's voice coalesced. And I understood who was narrating this novel and who was telling the story. I'm going to read a very brief passage right now, just to sort of reacquaint us with the text. And then I'm going to turn it over to you for your questions about anything, because I'm so flattered that you are here tonight that indeed all bets are off, and I will answer any questions about anything. And with that, Water Witches. Some people say that my wife's sister is a witch, my father for one, my brother for another, and while I will not dispute their use of the term when they are merely alluding to her somewhat contrary nature, I do take issue with them when they use the words in line what she believes is her calling. After all, it is a calling that to a lesser extent my wife hears as well. Nope, my sister-in-law is no witch, at least not literally. She, along with my wife and my mother-in-law, is simply a dowser. She is capable of finding underground water with a stick. She's capable of divining underground water with a stick. And unlike my wife and my mother-in-law, she is an active dowser. She does not merely have the power, she uses it. And she uses it profitably. Patience is a well-paid dowser. On a regular basis, Patience finds her people the underground springs that for generations will feed their wells. She finds water. She finds the water for drinking that will flow cold from kitchen taps, and the water for bathing and shaving and splashing that will gush or trickle for warm from bathroom faucets. She finds the water that will rain down from hoses and sprinkler systems onto a state that is full of backdoor gardens and rich in cornfields and dairy farms. And while water has rarely been the precious commodity of northern New England that it is in other parts of the world, the difference between finding it 20 yards below ground and 200 yards below ground is often a matter of feet, sometimes inches. Drill 16 feet east of that maple, and you'll find a spring at 40 feet. Drill a dozen feet south of that same tree, however, and you'll have to pound your way through 800 feet of granite, New England granite. According to her logbook and diary, Patience has now dowsed 1,812 wells, of which about 1,500 were in Vermont. Most of the others were in New England, although my sister-in-law has indeed used maps to find water for clients in Texas, Colorado, and throughout the Southwest. Moreover, Patience has doused in her life for far more than just water. She has been handsomely paid for finding oil, gold, and natural gas. She has found well over a dozen missing children and injured hikers for the Vermont and New Hampshire State Police, and thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of jewelry and money and antiques that had been lost. Patience has a track record of professional achievement that spans almost 2 decades now, and it is only a matter of time before the American Society of Dowsers' 76 dedicated chapters and 5,000 divining members strong these days starts a Dowsing Hall of Fame in her honor or finds a public relations firm to publicize her success. Patience told me 2 things when Laura, my wife, introduced us almost 20 years ago. She told me that as a dowser she is in touch with the earth, and she told me that as a man I have great potential to become grotesque. We were sitting in the farmhouse in Landaff, in which Patience and Laura grew up, in the kitchen that was the soul and center of the structure. The Avery family did not simply cook in that kitchen or eat in that kitchen. They lived in that kitchen, savoring the warmth that came from the wood stove they kept burning 8 months of the year. The kitchen table, a pumpkin pine monster, longer and wider than a ping pong table, was the desk on which Laura did her homework every school night for 12 years. It was the cutting board on which the girl's mother chopped vegetables, rolled flour, sliced bacon. And when that table wasn't covered with papers of algebra problems or the remnants of a pie crust, it served also as the conference table around which the Avery family would gather whenever there was a decision of any magnitude that had to be made. And so when Laura brought me home to meet her family the spring of our senior year of college, it was only natural that she would sit me down at the pumpkin pine heart of the Avery homestead. Laura had warned me about Patience, telling me flat out that Patience would probably try and scare me away for no other reason than the thrill of the hunt. But I was 21 and unconvinced or unaware of my God-given inability to win this sort of fight. So I asked Patience what she meant about men being grotesque, challenging her. And she asked me in return with a flatness to her voice that in tone alone conveyed oceans of disgust, "Are you stupid or curious?" And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you for your questions about anything. And it would be great if you could bring up some of the light. What a cue. How about sunlight? And the first question is always the hardest for you and for me.
Well, we're asking people if they want to come down and ask a question right here. I'm asking for a writer friend. She wanted to know, your name is well known and opens probably many doors, but what do you do when you're a beginning writer, and how do you get your name known? What suggestions do you have for a beginning writer?
Okay, the question is, if you're a beginning writer, how do you get your name known? And Robin, I want to ask you, does she mean when her books are published, or to get people's attention when she's researching a book?
I think more when she's researching, just the very beginning, so.
Okay. If you're a beginning writer and you're writing fiction, one of the things I found is that people love to talk about what they do. We all love to talk about what we do. And when I was researching Water Witches or Past the Bleachers, the novel that preceded Water Witches, I was not a household name. In fact, I was astonished to meet anyone who wasn't related to me by blood who'd ever read one of my books. But I still found when I would pick up the phone and call somebody and say, "Hi, my name's Chris Bohjalian, I'm a writer. I want to talk to you about what it's like, for example, to be a medical examiner, an EMT, an accountant, a public defender." I always found people said yes. And I think there are two reasons for that. The first is the notion that we do like to talk about what we do for a living. But I think the second is that fiction offers anonymity. When I'm writing a novel and I'm interviewing someone, they're not necessarily, no one will ever have to know that I interviewed them. Because I always give people the option of being in the acknowledgments or not being in the acknowledgments. And if they don't want to be in the acknowledgments and absolutely preserve their anonymity, that's fine. For a book like Water Witches, it was really, people were really supportive and interested. For a book like Midwives, they were very supportive and interested. For a book like Transistor Radio, they thought I was certifiable, talked to me, and then did not want their name in the acknowledgments. For those of you who have not read Transistor Radio, it is about a public school teacher in Bartlett, Vermont, not Bartlett, New Hampshire, who falls in love with a man who's having a sex change to become a woman. Now, I mentioned Bartlett, Vermont. One of the things that I've done with all my books, because I love the Connecticut, the eastern side of the Connecticut River as much as the western side of the Connecticut River, is I always take a New Hampshire village or town, and moving to Vermont. So, Landaff, Vermont. Before You Know Kindness, my new novel, is the first time I've ever not simply moved the New Hampshire village or town to the west, but I've actually kept it in New Hampshire. So Before You Know Kindness is set in Sugar Hill and Franconia, New Hampshire. You have the microphone. You can shout out the questions too, all of them.
What was my question? Well, it's been over 10 years since you wrote Water Witches. Looking back on it now, would you write it differently? Are you entirely happy with the form that it took at that time? You know, you're a different person now, 10 years after. How do you approach an issue like that?
The question is, Water Witches was published 10 years ago. I wrote it 11 and 12 years ago. Are there things I would do differently as a writer? Yes, absolutely. This is the earliest of my novels that I allowed to remain in print. There are 3 books that preceded this that I keep out of print. There's just enough in this book that I still feel okay about, that I'm comfortable to have people read it. So things that I like about the book, I like the humor in it, but I wish there was more humor. This book has the 2 dullest words that any novelist can ever use: water withdrawal. I would love to find a way to approach water withdrawal in a more compelling fashion. There are parts of this book when I reread it that feel to me as if I am writing a legal brief. And yeah, there are lawyers in this, but you know, legal briefs belong in one part of our reading mind and novels belong in another part. Now, this book is a girl in it named Miranda. And when I was writing this novel, my wife was even pregnant with our daughter, who's now 11. And when I reread the parts about Miranda, I do feel you really were meant to be a dad. I read this book aloud to my daughter when she was 9 because she wanted to read one of my books and it seemed like a good one to read aloud. And I was really pleased with how much my daughter Grace liked Miranda. And I'd forgotten this one sentence in the book until I read it aloud when I got to it with my daughter. It's the scene where Miranda is dancing alone in her butterfly costume, her butterfly brownie costume, and doesn't know that her dad is watching her. And it's a 3-word sentence. Miranda is Grace. And my daughter came there and said, "Hey, that's me." I was pleased with that. But it's far beyond an apprentice novel, but I do think I've gotten better in the last decade. Thank you, Michael, for that question.
Why won't you let those 3 older books go back into print?
Why won't I allow those 3 older books to go back in print? Because they're really bad. How bad are they? This is a true story. I wrote the single worst first novel ever published, bar none. It's called A Killing in the Real World. How bad is this? True story. It's published in 1988. I'm 27 years old, and Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock, the phone rings in our house in Vermont, and it's my wife's former college roommate, who now lives in Concord, Massachusetts. And she says, "Guess what? Chris's book, it's reviewed in the Boston Globe today." And so my wife, this is my first review in a major newspaper, and so my wife says, "Is it a good review?" And her former roommate says, I don't remember. So my wife says, "Can you read it to us?" And her roommate hems and haws and says, we have just found the newspapers up for recycling and they're out in the garage. Now this is before www.bostonglobe.com. So I have to wait. Oh, and the general store in Lincoln, Vermont closes at noon back in those days. So I have to wait until the next day, Monday, to get a copy of the Boston Globe and read a review that ends with this paragraph. And so although Chris Bohjalian attacks his first novel with real energy, his writing is styleless. and without grace. And the quaint St. Martin's tradition of citing the editor in the acknowledgments, in this case, did absolutely nothing to ensure the quality of editorial detail. That was my first book. My second book, Hangman, is a perfectly adequate ghost story. Does the world need another perfectly adequate ghost story set in New England? Probably not. And my third novel, Past the Bleachers, became a lovely Hallmark movie. It's about a father and it's about a couple grieving for the loss of their 10-year-old son to leukemia. And the father's decision to coach what would have been his son's Little League team, even though his son, of course, is no longer on it. It became a really nice made-for-TV movie. Better than the book. And whenever a made-for-TV movie is better than the novel, that's a pretty good barometer that that book should stay out of print. That is why those three books are, only available if you go to Gibson's and say, will you do an out-of-print book search for me, though I am going to tell Michael to say no. I have a question over here. Yes?
Were the catamounts actually seen in Vermont? Do you have evidence that they had?
The question is this. Were the catamounts actually seen in Vermont? Was there evidence that catamounts had actually been there? When I'm writing my books, I have no idea where they are going. I never outline them. I simply begin with a vague premise. In this case, a environmental development battle at a ski resort, and that's it. No idea we're going to be catamounts. What happened was this. I was looking for a scene to soften Scotty Winston, to show that he's not a complete creep, to show that he's an okay dad, despite the fact he's the guy who's always justifying the utility 18% rate hike on the evening news. And so I thought, I need another scene with Scotty and Miranda. Let's put them on the chairlift and have them having some, Ben and Jerry's peace pops together and just talking. It's going to be a short scene, and that sole purpose was to humanize Scotty Winston. And all of a sudden, they looked into the woods, and there they were, the three catamount's, the mother and the two cubs. But I had no idea that was going to happen. It wasn't part of the global plan. I'm really glad they did see them. I'm glad they saw them for a lot of reasons, but the most important is this. It deepened the novel and moved it from a book about, save us all, water withdrawal, to a book about parents and children. And in some ways, this book, and this is another reason why I'm glad it's in print, became a precursor to so much of the other work I would do over the next 10 years. There are two strands in this book you will see again in Midwives, and in the Law of Similars, and in Ordinary Kindness, and in different threads, and that's this. In the same Midwives, in my opinion, is first and foremost a mother-daughter love story because of those catamounts. Water Witches, in my mind, is first and foremost a father-daughter love story. And secondly, though this doesn't build to a trial, it builds to a hearing. And I did all that I could to make that hearing feel like a trial, make it feel like a courtroom, because I loved the dynamics and the drama in that ridiculous Statehouse cafeteria. Yes?
Are you being a writer? What wanted you to?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. Before I became a writer, what made me want to become a writer? I loved reading. And I just loved the way that books could go with me wherever I went. I love television, too, and movies. I still love movies. I still love television. I still love drama. I still love theater. But I love the portability of a book, and I have great memories of reading Edgar Allan Poe short stories in my dentist's waiting room when I was 8 and 9 years old. And in fact, I was actually writing stories even then that were kind of Edgar Allan Poe-like, and my father still has some of them in this banker's box in South Florida. These short stories I wrote when I was 7 and 8 years old about disembodied hens that emerge from wishing wells and sibling rivalry on the school safety patrol. Whenever I'm flipped, my father threatens to unveil them to the world as the apprentice fiction of Chris Bohjalian. The thing I think about being a writer, though, is that no one becomes a writer because they planned out this careful career path to become a writer. They simply wrote. We simply write. It's why we write and why we're not lawyers or doctors or bus drivers or firefighters or accountants. It's because we can't imagine doing anything else with our lives that would give us anywhere near this amount of pleasure. I amassed over 250 rejection slips before I ever sold anything. I was getting beaten up by the New Yorkers and the GQs and the Sewanee reviews, but I never stopped writing because there was still the enormous pleasure of simply writing. And I think we can see that in writers' groups, that meet in libraries and bookstores and living rooms. You don't have groups of aspirational lawyers, who are getting together and sharing their journals. But you do writers because it's so much fun, and if you are drawn to it, it's an addiction. And that's why I became a writer. Thank you for asking that question.
You comment that you start off generally with a broad subject, framing. What kind of a thought process, inspiration brings you to pick that type of, or pick any topic that you take off from?
The question is that I usually begin with an interest in some topic or something that interests me. What is the thought process that gets me to that particular topic? It varies dramatically. I'll give you two examples. Have any of you read Midwives? I love New Hampshire. Midwives is a novel, of course, about a home birth that goes tragically wrong and it involves a midwife. I grew interested in midwifery at a dinner party. My wife and I had argued with a girl at a hospital. And there was nothing about the delivery that was going to lead us away from the obstetric model from birth. It was a perfectly fine delivery. Actually, it's easy for me to say it's a perfectly fine delivery. My wife might quibble with that. It was 22 hours. But, there's nothing that said, let us say, bring on the midwives. I hadn't even heard of midwives, really. But then I'm at this dinner party. And I realized that this intelligent, beautiful, charismatic, interesting woman sitting to my right is a midwife. And when she hears that my wife and I had traveled 32 miles in the still of the night to the nearest hospital to have our daughter delivered, she says, laughing, you used me. You could have had Grace in your bedroom, and you could have caught her. Well, I'd never heard the verb catch used before in the context of birth. So I got really interested. And the more I chatted with that midwife that night at dinner, the more I thought there's a really interesting story waiting to be told about the literal and the metaphoric place of birth in this country. And so I asked if we could have lunch the next day, and we did, and she brought with her all of her books. She brought with her the whole midwifery canon, Hearts and Hands and Spiritual Midwifery. And over the next few months, she started introducing me to her moms and dads who had their babies at home, and I was off and running on a book about birth. No idea it would be about a bad outcome when I started, but I did know that I was interested in this topic. My new book, Before You Know Kindness, is completely different, but again, it comes back to issues. On September 11, 2001, I was on a book tour for Transistor Radio, and I was on a runway in Denver, 2 time zones to the west. And at 7:15 Mountain Time, 9:15 back there in the east, I was at gate C-16 at Denver Airport. I turned on my cell phone to say good morning to my lovely wife back here in New England. And I said, hi, sweetheart, how are you? Good morning. And she said, haven't you heard? It's not a good morning at all. And when we lived in New York, she'd worked on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center, and she told me about what was unfolding at that moment at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon. Well, they actually had us board the plane, and then they had us evacuate the plane, and then they had us evacuate the airport. And so I went back to the hotel where I'd spent the night before, and I would spend the next 8 days stranded in that hotel in Denver. Now, when I'm home in New England, I really only write fiction about 4.5 to 5 hours a day. I write from about 5 a.m. until 9:30 in the morning. In that hotel room in Denver, however, I was writing 10 and 11 hours a day because anything was better than watching television alone in a claustrophobic hotel room and seeing those images that have now been seared on all of our brains. Now that September, I was writing a book set in Boston in 1666 about a domestic abuse divorce trial, and I wrote a lot that week. Finally was able to fly home on September 19th, and on September 20th, I resumed work back home in Vermont on that book because, as Billy Crystal famously tells Danny DeVito, we throw mama from the train, writers write. But it was really clear to me by 8:30 in the morning that I was never, ever going to finish that novel. Because every moment I spent with it was bringing me back to that claustrophobic hotel room and that moment when we were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. So I boxed up all 180 pages of that manuscript and sent them south to my alma mater, where my papers are archived. And then the next day, September 21, I needed to start something new. But I didn't have an issue. I didn't have a topic. There wasn't any specific news issue that I cared passionately about at that moment. And so I gave myself some advice that I've given aspiring writers for years, and that's this. If you don't know what to write, simply write down a memory. As another writer has famously observed, all you need to have had to become a novelist is a childhood. And so I started pulling a memory. In that particular moment, September 21, I wanted a happy memory. And the happiest memory I had that came to me at, 5 in the morning, September 21, had occurred 2 months earlier in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. My wife and my daughter and I were visiting my mother-in-law in her house with its spectacular views of Mount Washington, Mount Lafayette, and Three Graces. And joining us, as they always do, were my in-laws from New York City and their daughter, who's a little bit older than my daughter. And about 10 in the morning, I heard the clonk, 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 as these two girls pounded their way down the stairs, opened the screen door, and joined their grandmother on the wraparound porch that looks out on the presidential range, the White Mountains. And I joined them, and these two girls were still in their nightgowns, and my mother-in-law, their grandmother, was still in her nightgown. And these girls were absolutely entranced by their grandmother as she talked to them about birds, and specifically the differences between crows and ravens. And I was so filled with love for these two generations of females on either side of me that I put that scene down on paper to see where it would go. And if you should ever pick up Before You Know Kindness, you will see that scene in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire is the very first scene in chapter 1. From there I worked backwards. Who are these two girls? Why does one live in Vermont? Why does one live in New York City? What do their moms and their dads do for a living? And all fiction needs conflict and human transformation. Those are the 2 points on a compass that matter most. You can see it in Water Witches, in the conflict between Scotty and Patience, between the Dowsers and the ski resort. And you can see the human transformation up close and personal in Scotty Winston. Well, for Before You Know Kindness, before I knew it, I had a northern New Englander, a dad, who's a deer hunter, and I had a New York City executive for an animal rights organization, a fictional version of PETA, and I was off and running. And I probably told you way more than you needed to know about how I embark on a book. When I was 18 years old, I wanted to spend the summer with my girlfriend, now my wife, and she was going to be with her mom at their summer house in Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. So that meant I had to get a job in Franconia or Sugar Hill, New Hampshire. I got a job as a dishwasher at Hillman's, but through a combination of pluck and luck and the fact the seafood chef had some good attitude. And so, by the time August rolled around, some evenings I was cleavering 40 and 50 lobsters a night, especially when the bus tours would come in to see the old man in the mountain, maybe rest in peace. And Spencer, by the end of that summer, was a vegetarian. And I, at the end of that summer, was a vegetarian. And just like Spencer, I tend to view impatience as a virtue. And so there's a lot of me and Spencer. I shudder to admit how much. Though my wife's my marriage is fine and I can still use my right arm, and I don't think my daughter is ever going to try to shoot it off the way Spencer's daughter is.
You seem willing to write about just about anything. Is there a subject you would simply, even if it came across your mind, you'd avoid?
I seem capable of writing just about anything. Is there a subject that I might try to avoid?
Yeah, like if you thought of it, you're like, no, I won't write about that.
I haven't found one yet. I haven't found a subject that I won't write about. There are subjects that I've tried to write about and I have failed to do them justice. And so those, and there are two cases. One, I am half Armenian. My mother was Swedish. My father is Armenian. So, often I'm asked to write about the Armenian diaspora in 1915, and I did write one novel about that, and it is a train wreck.
What's your understanding of how these dowsers do what they do?
What is my understanding how these dowsers do what they do? Well, I like Patience's definition. It's pre-linguistic sensory perception. I don't know what that means, but a dowser once said that to me. Because I said, how do you do it? And she said, it's pre-linguistic sensory perception. And I think what she was getting at is on some level, we're all water, and we're all in tune with the earth. And if you put an elephant in a desert, he will find the oasis, supposedly. And that's as good as it gets, as far as I can tell you. I interviewed a lot of dowsers, and some gave me very clinical answers, and some gave me very scientific answers, and some gave me very esoteric, New Age, crystal-carrying, Birkenstock-wearing, Byzantine answers, and it was all Greek to me. I just know that I can't, and everyone else can. What do you think?
I don't know, I've got a cousin up in Derby Line who's into this in a big way. She wants to douse everything and which way your bed goes.
Oh, it's true. I had a dowser douse my house, and my house had all these hot spots that could only be fixed if you rearrange the furniture, which is why Miranda ends up rearranging the furniture. What about finding medical problems by dowsing? My HMO-sanctioned primary care physician discourages it. But I do know dowsers who, will douse you and tell you what specialist you should see.
Do dowsers claim to be able to move a vein like they do in the book?
Do dowsers claim to be able to move a vein like the dowsers do in this book? Yes, some of them do. And they do it precisely the way that Patience and Miranda and Sasson, the way they do it, yes. Great. What an interesting notion. Thank you. Okay. The question is Scotty more objective than the novelist? I never want my books to be polemics. I never want, I don't want, if somebody becomes a vegetarian after reading The 40 No Kindness, that's great. If somebody becomes a dowser after reading Water, which is, that's fine. But my goal is to tell page-turning stories. And so one of the things that was important in Water Witches is to make sure that the conflict is presented in a balanced fashion. And so Scotty makes a lot of jokes at his own expense about being a running slime dog of capitalism. And, Patience talks about how he's so slippery that the plates will slip through his hands. But I think the reader understands that, I hope the reader understands that Scotty isn't nearly as snarky as his sister-in-law thinks he is, and that there are two sides to this issue. And that I hope the book does point out there are two sides to that issue, yes. Thank you.
Are there politicians or ski area people in Vermont who recognize themselves in this book? I'm wondering what kind of reaction you got from the book there.
Are there folks in the ski industry or lobbyists who recognize themselves in this book? Hopefully not, because hopefully that everyone in this book is if nothing else, a composite. And that I didn't, even my sister-in-law isn't really Patience Avery, though she aspires to it. So they're just composites. And I will tell you that the lobbyist who I spent the most time with, just a terrifically interesting guy, is in fact going to be the lobbyist who is, the quote-unquote expert on the set if the movie ever gets made. And he still, he still talks about when people do think he is Scotty Winston, and when he's in rooms with people who go on and on about Water Witches and have no idea how much time he spent with me when I was writing Water Witches. Here's one interesting tidbit I will share with you about the movie. This is the only one of my books that wasn't optioned for a movie right away, because Hollywood options a lot of stuff. It's not a testimony to the fact that I write great stories. It's a testimony to the fact that Hollywood options lots of things. But this book was only optioned in 2004, 9 years after it was published. Why? Well, because Hollywood, first of all, had no idea what their pronunciation, not my name, dowser was. They thought dowsers were this odd science fiction cult I had created. So it was a science fiction novel with no robots or androids or Starfleet commands. They didn't know what to make of it. And they also didn't option it until one particular producer figured out, and these are his words, this book is a chick flick with too few chicks. So, if the movie ever gets made, and I've read the screenplay and I like it a lot, the lobbyist for the ski industry is no longer Scotty Winston, but is Laura. Laura is now a mother-daughter love story instead of a father-daughter love story, and it is Laura who's got the amazing dowsing prowess along with her sister Patience, but it is Laura who douses where their father's body is, and ever since then has completely repressed her dowsing gene. And it is Laura who is the great conflict of conscience with all of her partners in the law firm and with the ski industry, and, who rediscovers her faith, so to speak. Scotty, and this is, are there any male children's book writers in the audience? I ask this because whenever you want to make a male ineffectual or use him for comic relief in the movie, you make him a children's book writer. And so sure enough, Scotty Winston is now a children's book writer. He appears once or twice in the novel and the movie to say children's book cute things, and Laura kind of disses him and then goes out to be, a high-powered lobbyist. But I do like the movie a lot. I really do. I see a hand in the back?
So I was going to ask the lady about that.
Ready?
Your books tend to have daughters, which makes sense now to the daughter, but you did not have a daughter before, right? You could keep your
That's right.
Why daughters instead of sons?
Why Daughters Instead of Sons? Just before The Buffalo Soldiers published, somebody pointed that out to me, that Water Witches, single daughter, Midwives, single daughter, Transistor Radio, single daughter, Law of Similars, single daughter. Then I completely surprised me, The Buffalo Soldiers, son! Why do I tend to have girls more than boys? I haven't the foggiest notion. And I think, when I was asked that question, it caught me completely off guard because I didn't realize it until I was asked that question. I knew the Buffalo Soldier, a little boy, but all I can think of is, there are certain parts of my life that I don't want to put into fiction. And maybe I sort of compartmentalize my own childhood that's off limits. I will shamelessly steal my mother-in-law for Before You Know Kindness. I will shamelessly steal my daughter, but, no, I'm off limits. I don't know. I'm guessing. Is that a hand in the back?
How do you feel when they want to change aspects of your writing to make movies?
How do I feel when they want to change aspects of my writing for my movies? I'm completely fine with it. When I finish a book, I'm essentially ready to move on. I'm ready for the next project, and if somebody wants to reinterpret this material for a film, I'm thrilled. I love movies, and I love books that become movies, and I love the 2 times my books have become movies. Are they different? Yes. Does it bother me? Except for the fact that asteroid that falls on Sybil Danforth and Midwives, I was okay with it. No asteroid, no asteroid, it's fine. And I think part of that is because I have always been careful to make sure that whoever is optioning the material respects its fundamental integrity. Even Water Witches, when this particular producer was talking about what he wanted to do with it, he said to me, are you okay with that? I mean, if you think the lobbyist has to be Scotty, the lobbyist will be Scotty. But I really understood what he was saying. And it's not as if he is going to add an asteroid. Again, it's about an individual who has a crisis of conscience and rediscovers, in this case, her faith, that she doesn't understand everything.
Have you ever considered writing your own screenplay?
Yes, I have considered writing my own screenplays. I'm often asked, and there are a couple of reasons for that. The big one, I think, in most producers' minds, I cost a heck of a lot less because I've never written a screenplay. And I always say no. And the reason for that is because it's taken me so many years to become an adequate novelist, I shudder to think how long it would take me to become an adequate screenwriter. The most recent one I said no to was Before You Know Kindness.
When you're writing a project, you become really immersed in that and you don't allow the other ideas to filter in for another project, or are they always coming at you all the way?
When I'm writing a project, am I focused on that one project and I'm avoiding all other ideas, or am I allowing all other ideas to filter in? No. When I am writing a novel, I have a rapier-like focus on that particular issue, and I see the entire world through the perspective of that particular issue. When I was writing The Law of Similars about homeopathy, every ad I saw for echinacea would just make me cringe. Someone's going to beat you to the topic, and that'll be the big novel about homeopathy. Yeah, right. We are still waiting for the big novel about homeopathy. I have nothing to worry about. But I really am focused entirely on that particular novel and that particular subject until it is done. Now, because books have such a long gestation period, even after you finish it, I was going through the galleys for Water Witches while writing Midwives. I was touring for the Buffalo Soldier in paperback while writing Before You Know Kindness. There's always some overlap, but the first draft of itself is its own entity and has its own space in my life. Your questions are great. Did I know I always wanted to write fiction? Did I ever entertain poetry or nonfiction? I never entertained poetry. I discovered early on that I was not meant to be the next Rita Dove. But I do write a lot. In fact, in the 1990s, I was writing a ton of nonfiction. I have written over 35 magazine articles for the Boston Globe Sunday magazine alone. And I was, there was a peer group writing a lot of articles for Cosmopolitan and New Woman. All those articles about, emotional infidelity, they're mine. And in fact, but I did know that I always wanted to be a novelist, first and foremost. And my path to get there was to learn my craft through short stories. And in fact, I should never make fun of Cosmopolitan, because the first short story I ever sold was to Cosmopolitan. I mentioned earlier that I had amassed over 250 rejection slips before I'd ever sold anything. Well, when I got that 250 rejection slip, I decided to reassess what I was doing. I said, maybe you shouldn't be writing for the New Yorker or Gentleman's Quarterly, because so far they don't really seem to want you. So, at the time, this is the mid-'80s, Cosmopolitan was publishing a lot of fiction at the time, and not all of it was about lingerie. So I amassed 6 months worth of Cosmopolitans, and I read the fiction in them really, really carefully. And then, when I thought I understood what they wanted, I wrote a short story about a female supermodel living in Soho in this cool loft who's married to a fabulously wealthy arbitrage trader, and the only thing that's cooler than their loft is their beach house on Fire Island. She married a little bit shaky, so one weekend she goes out to Fire Island to assess the state of their marriage, but she spends most of the time playing scantily clad beach volleyball. Cosmopolitan bought it. First story I ever sold. And sometimes you can find that particular issue on eBay, not because I have a short story in it, but because what is also in that issue, but 8 pages of female supermodels doing build your better bust breast exercises topless on a beach. My mother was so proud. And just for the record, what is the other piece of fiction in that particular issue of Cosmopolitan? The excerpt from Mona Simpson's critically acclaimed first novel, Anywhere But Here. I'm not kidding, they really were publishing pretty good fiction.
Do you have a favorite author? Would you enjoy reading your fiction?
Do I have a favorite author? I have a lot of favorite authors, and I'll tell you a few. Michael Herman mentioned one, New Hampshire's own Ernie Hebert, who I just think his work is really interesting and really funny and really surprising. I love everything that John Irving writes, and not simply because so much of it is set in New Hampshire, but because his characters are so wildly eccentric and idiosyncratic and surprising. I love Joyce Carol Oates' work because she's so comfortable with moral ambiguity. I'm right now in the midst of a Nick Hornby phase. And in the last 5 weeks, I've read High Fidelity, About a Boy, A Long Way Down. I think Nick Hornby's a stitch. I tend to go through phases like that where I have just favorite authors. And if you go to my website, if you go to my biography, there's actually a link to 10 of my favorite novels and 10 of my favorite beach reads. Is there one more? Way in the back, yes. We can do more than one, but one more, yes. George Eliot? Yes. If you go to the Modern Library of some George Eliot, Silas Marner, you will see that I wrote the introduction. Why George Eliot? I actually like Middlemarch. I think it's really pretty funny. I think Silas Marner is sort of a lovely story about a strange, unexpected extended family you don't normally find in the 19th century. I think that's probably why. I'll tell you, if I could have gotten to do any modern library introduction, I would have chosen Little Women or The Great Gatsby, which are 2 of my favorite books of all time.
What are you working on now?
Oh, but what am I working on now? Normally, I love that question. I don't love it tonight, and I'll tell you why. And I am going to answer it. It's a fine question and a great question. Because I finished a 3rd draft, actually to a 4th draft of my next book. And I've never been so far along in a book and felt that it was still so structurally unsound and wobbly and problematic. Twice before I've written books and not finished them, but I haven't gone through 4 drafts before I decided this book is a train wreck and stop. But I can't quite let go of this one, but I did make the decision at about 5:15 this afternoon today that I officially told Random House the earliest you can publish this, I'm telling you, is March of 2007, which gives me at least 6 more months to work on it and make the decision. They were planning on publishing it September of 2006, but I just don't feel it's ready, and as low as my standards are, they're not that low. But here's what it's about, and I'll tell you. It is about it was inspired by some photographs that a homeless photographer left behind in Burlington, Vermont. Photographs of Flip Wilson, David Steinberg, and Merle Evers, and these wonderful photographs of New York City in the 1950s and the 1960s that he took, that were left to the homeless shelter because he died with no family that we know of, intestate, no will. And I wondered, how do you go from photographing Merle Evers and Flip Wilson and David Steinberg and Paul Sorvino to being homeless in northern New England and dying in a single-room occupancy apartment that the homeless shelter found for you? And from that journey, I've written a novel narrated largely by a 26-year-old female social worker who was sexually assaulted on page 1 of the novel, and her friendship with this elderly schizophrenic photographer in the homeless shelter, and Jay Gatsby, and the mystery of how these photographs, of how he went from taking these pictures to winding up in the shelter. There's so much of this book that I love, and there's so much of this book that is a disaster. So that's what I'm working on right now. Is there one more? Yes. How much does my writing change from first draft to last? Well, as Gabriel Garcia Marquez said, the only reason writers publish is to stop rewriting. I could go on a long time and never let go because it's hard. And that last draft, when it's the final page proofs, and you're changing an adverb here, or you're tightening one sentence here, but you're making the final changes. I can spend a month with those pages, much to the publisher's frustration, because it is so hard for me to let go. Before you know kindness, the first draft was 194,000 words. The final draft of that book, and it is, I think, the best book I will ever write, is 142,000 words. Did I simply, between drafts 1 and draft 8, edit out 52,000 words? No. I probably edited out 80 or 90,000 words and wrote 30 or 40,000 new words. This book that I'm writing now, if I finish it, if I ever get a final draft I like, will go through at least 7 or 8 drafts. And we'll have gone from being, I know for a fact the first draft was 160,000 words, and the final draft will hopefully be no more than 120. I want to thank all of you so much. Your questions are spectacular. I want to thank Concord for having me. I want to thank New Hampshire for letting me come east across the river. You are just great, and I love being here. And if there are any questions I haven't answered you want to ask me, I'm going to be just in that other corner. You can ask me there, or you can go to my website, chrisbohjalian.com, and ask me questions. I do read my emails. If there are any reading groups out there, and you're ever reading one of my books, and you want me to join you via speakerphone, just go to my website, click reading groups. I visit with reading groups all the time, in person and via speakerphone, and it's great fun. And I want to thank all of you so much. Thank you.